Hello and welcome to Unstoppable. I'm your host, Kerwin Ray, and today we talk all things health and vitality with Dr. Joanna McMillan. Joanna is one of Australia's most trusted, recognised health, wellbeing and nutrition experts, and she's actually spent well over a decade, get this, over 10 years as a presenter on The Today Show and The Catalyst. She's also got a PhD, which makes her pretty darn smart. I think they even call these people doctors these days. Written 7 books, oh my God, I haven't read that many, and find out why you have trouble sticking to your diets or meal plans, or does this shit even work? And why it is so hard for most people to eat the right foods. So if you've ever wanted to get down and dirty into your nutrition and your diet and find out why you do some of the things that you do, but more importantly, how to do it better, check this out. It's going to be good. Listen up. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's an absolute honour and a pleasure to welcome to Dr. Joanna McMillan. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here.
It's really exciting to have you. Now, for those people who perhaps don't know who you are, give us a little, what's the 30-second elevator pitch of who Dr. Joe is? Can I call you Dr. Joe?
You can call me Dr. Joe, or just call me Joe. That's
Joe,
fine.
okay.
Yeah,
That's very informal.
Dr. Joanna's the brand, but
brand, right,
I'm just
okay.
Joe, really. Well, who am I? You can hear from my accent. I'm originally a Scot. Came here as a dietitian and a fitness instructor. Did my PhD here in Sydney, and I've been here ever since. So it's 19 years now that I've been here. So really, I've carved a role for myself trying to talk healthy lifestyles and good nutrition science, so good evidence-based nutrition, how that impacts on our lives. And really, that's my goal, is to try and really help Australians to get more out of life and give more to life, simply by the way they live.
It's so nice to hear you say that, because most people in your space typically play in the weight loss space, teaching people how to lose weight. But it sounds like to me you've got more of a holistic approach than just losing weight.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, of course I have to talk about weight loss sometimes, and I do run a program I call deliberately Get Lean, and my book is Get Lean, Stay Lean. Weight is part and parcel of that, and weight, of course, whether you're underweight or very overweight, it's a very visible sign of you getting your sort of diet and lifestyle out of whack. But there's lots of things that contribute to that, and it's only one sign. So, what I try to tell people is actually, if you put your focus on health first and foremost, health and well-being first and foremost, then actually your weight kind of falls into, and there's a broad range of weights that can be healthy.
So we live in an age where we have the microwave mindset. We want the results in 60 seconds. We want instant gratification, you know, because we see it on Instagram, that we see the 5-week challenge, the 30-day challenge, the 7-day challenge, the 3-day challenge. Why is it, do you think? Because I honestly believe that psychology plays a fundamentally massive role in not just weight loss, which is a component of health, but health in general. What is it that prevents people, embracing health as a way of life rather than just a fucking event that they do every now and then?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I do think a lot of it is mindset, but a lot of it also is modern pressures. If we use weight but also health just as that bar, as that measure, modern life has become really difficult to live in a healthy way. Researchers talk about it being an obesogenic environment, which just basically is a
the obesity epidemic. Oh, it was terrible. There was pork chops and chocolate cake everywhere.
Oh, it's a horrible, horrible word. But anyway, I can't think of a nicer way to say it. But essentially all that means is that the way that the demands that are made of modern life and the way that we're all expected to live our lives actually makes it tough to control your weight and to live healthily.
I've got to push back a little bit on that. I'm curious, is that really the reality, or is that just the excuse? Because we also live in a time where we've never had more access to information. We've never had more access to pre-prepared meals, home-delivered meals and that kind of a thing.
But that stuff can also get expensive. Yep. So yes, if you're living in what I call the bubble of this part of Sydney, and the same is true of Melbourne.
I think she says we're living in a bubble, Timmy.
Well, if you live in one of the bubbles of Australia, then yes, you're lucky. You've got access to great quality food. You hopefully have a good job that you can earn a reasonable income, and yes, you can have home delivered food and so on. And some of these things are more affordable than other ways. But actually, if we look broadly across Australia, there are large parts of Australia where it is cheaper to go and buy a fast food meal to feed the family than it is to buy the fresh ingredients, and that makes me sad. The demands of our jobs can make it hard to fit exercise and activity into your day, and it demands a lot of sitting at a desk time or sitting wherever that might be, sitting on transport, sitting in a car. All of these things can make it really tough. Now, it doesn't mean it's impossible. Part of my role, I think, is to inspire people, motivate people, and help to make it easier. My personal mantra is, how can I make healthy eating easier for Australians to follow and people around the world to follow?
So when we look at weight, because obviously my pedigree is really in business, but performance is a huge part of what I do, and because understanding that I can give two people the same information, one will go and make tens of millions of dollars, and the other one will sit there broken, miserable 6 months later, 12 months later, 10 years later, and complain the information doesn't work. And I see, health information often in the same kind of light. You can give two people the exact same information. One person will end up transforming their life, having loads of energy, becoming, more balanced, more stable, more healthier, leaner, live longer. Yet the other person will sit there and bitch and moan and say the information doesn't work. What is it that is it? What? How do we get there? And what do we do?
Lots of times people will say to me, I'm just not in the right emotional state or to make those changes. The reality is that whether we're talking about business, whether we're talking about motivation, whether we're talking about health and wellness, the ability for people to change is a really interesting thing to look at. For the most part, we find it very hard. We find it difficult to change our everyday habits. So a lot of what I do is just about helping people to break old habits and to create new habits. And I think part of our trouble is that we often set the bar way too high and we try to change way too many things at once.
Yeah, right.
So we're in this, you described it as the kind of microwave concept. We do want this instant transformation. So we say, right, starting Monday, I'm going to get up and go to the gym every morning at 6, and I'm going to be nicer to the kids, and I'm going to spend more time with my husband, and I'm going to make love at least once a week, and I'm going to whatever it might be. We set all these things that we're going to do, and then we wonder why a few weeks down the line we go, oh God, I'm failing at so many of these, and then we give up completely. So actually what I believe is important is to just have a handful of goals that really are realistic. The old-fashioned sort of SMART goal setting actually works, and it's applicable to health and wellness. So make it realistic. Think about, if you're not a morning person, you just won't find me in the gym at 6 a.m, but you might find me in the gym at 9 a.m, or at lunchtime, or in the afternoon even, and I've got a flexible job mostly, so I can make that work for me. So you've got to find what is realistic for you, what can you really do, what is going to fit with your current routine and your current demands on your day, and then start to integrate those changes. And guess what? If you make a couple of changes, every week or every couple of weeks, and you build on that, then suddenly I meet you a few months down the line and you've made lots of changes, but you're keeping them up.
So how do you get someone to think that way? Because again, I see the obvious barrier is most people overestimate themselves in the short term, underestimate themselves in the long term. And so saying to someone you need to set a realistic goal is like, well, yeah, I'll try that next. So is there a psychology to health?
There is definitely a psychology to health, and there's and part of what people like me do is try to build on that mindset. How can I
What's the basis of a health psychology? Where does it start?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with understanding where someone's at, understanding that there are all these demands in life, that there's not just when you if you meet someone and you're trying to coach them in business, you don't just come at them immediately with what your advice is. You would try to glean out of them what's their current situation, what's their business in, what are the barriers, what do they want to achieve, and so on. And I would do the same thing with someone if I was coaching them about changing their health and wellness. Where are they now? What are the barriers? What can we do to break down the barriers? What can we do to get them into that better mindset? And sometimes it is a matter of going, okay, do you know what? You're not going to manage to change, Kerwin, what you're eating until we deal with your stress, because your stress levels are preventing you from being able to make any of these other changes. So what I talk about with people are 6 key areas, and importantly, they're underpinned by joy. Because I really believe that unless you have fun, unless I can get people enjoying a healthy lifestyle and a healthy diet, I'm never going to get them to stick with it. So joy has to underpin the whole thing.
It's interesting you say that. We did some work with a guy called Tony Shea a couple of years ago. He has a business called Zappos out of the US. They're world renowned for having one of the most incredible cultures that translates into incredible business. And he wrote a book called Delivering Happiness. In this book, they actually call from a research that was done, I think in 1978, or it could have been 1988, whereby they discovered that people who are happy are 78% more likely to be successful in life in general.
Yeah, and they're likely to live longer too. When we look at the blue zones, which are the areas in the world where people live the longest and they tend to seem to have the healthiest lives, one of the key things that comes out of that is that A, their stress levels are under control, but B, they're happier. They have joy in their lives and they have social connectivity. And actually, I think that is so important for any kind of health change that you're trying to make. And then the 6 key steps that are layered over the top of that are food, of course, so the way that you're eating. drink in terms of what you're drinking just for hydration, but also the other drinks that might be contributing kilojoules, and of course alcohol is in there. Excuse me. We've got exercise and activity, which I split up, because exercise is your kind of formal putting your runners on and going to do some exercise. Activity is just how active are you every day. Yeah. And then there's sleep and there's stress. And often it's sleep and stress that kind of get pushed under the carpet and you don't expect someone like me to talk about. But actually those things are just as important as what you're eating, how you're living, how you're moving.
Well, from what you've said, you actually point to stress being one of the most important things to deal with if you're going to become healthy.
Well, I see all of those 6 areas kind of like, 6 overlapping circles, because they impact on each other. Yeah, right. So if you're highly stressed, you might be drinking too much alcohol because you're using alcohol as your way of dealing with stress, winding down at the end of the day. You probably are eating badly because you're using food as an energy pick-me-up in the day. You're almost certainly not sleeping well because stress, of course, we know it affects that tossing and turning in the middle of the night. You're then not sleeping well, so you don't feel like exercising because you're exhausted. You're snappy with your partner and your kids or your friends and your colleagues because you're tired and you're stressed. And the whole thing impacts on each other. So it's like a kind of snowball, gaining momentum. Yeah.
So I think it's really important for us to create a benchmark, or at least a baseline of, because you talk about SMART goals and being realistic. And when most people get healthy, it's typically because one or two things has happened. They look in the mirror and they're fat and they don't like what they see. Or the doctor said to them, if you don't do something, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So when we look at good health, what's the baseline? What is good health?
Well, I think start by how do you feel? Yeah. If I talk to, we're talking a lot here about motivation to change, and those important life events actually really are important, because often the doctor telling you, or there's some incident that acts as a trigger for change, and that's what we see often with people who make major changes to their health and wellness, and probably in other areas of their life too. So that's the first thing. There often is that trigger, and that's great. Hang on to that trigger and think, okay, great, that can drive me now to look for the way that I want to change. And then the way I see it is to look at, well, it's kind of like this graphic equalizer. If you look at those 6 key areas, which one is wildly out of whack? And that's the one that I need to focus on first. So I would be sort of drawing on the motivation of that person to go, okay, look, it's your sleep that is really affecting things here. Unless we address sleep, we're not going to be able to focus on the other things. So it's, and sometimes it's little tweaks for everything. And actually I encourage everyone to do that. I do it continually on myself throughout life, is to think, okay, how am I feeling today? Because that's your key motivator. If I tell you, Kerwin, look, the way you're living your life dramatically is increasing your risk of having diabetes in 10 years or heart disease in 20 years, 30 years. That's not a motivator for you to change today.
Does that mean I have to stop eating donuts? Anyway, so a bit of a segue there.
So, well, yeah, this is where it comes down to looking at those areas in your life and thinking, all right, what do I need to tweak? Where is out of whack? What can I get into place? And I can guarantee the way I can motivate you is to think about how you feel. Yeah. And people know they don't need to be told that they're fat. They don't need to be told they're unhealthy. They can feel it.
But is it fair to say with some people it's degrees? Because I know for myself, like I was a competitive athlete all through high school into my early 20s, and I managed to train up until my late 20s. And then all of a sudden I almost woke up one day and I think I was like 38 or 39 and I was fat. And I mean, I had like more chins than a Chinese phone book. I was like proper fat. And I remember thinking to myself, how did I get here? And because I think sometimes, because it's 1 degree every year, 100 grams every month. And after a while, we go from thinking, okay, I know it feels good, to thinking the way I am feeling right now, that is just feeling good. So if we're at that point, how do we know if we're feeling good? How do we know if where we're at is actually feeling good, or if it's just the fact that we've got conditioned or used to where we're at? Yeah,
well, look, what you point out is exactly what happens. Nobody gets fat overnight, although you might feel like people talk about having a fat day. Just because you ate a slice of chocolate cake or you had those donuts yesterday doesn't make you fat today. Fat, unfortunately, does creep up very, very slowly. Fat is energy-dense stuff, so you're seriously overeating kilojoules over a long period of time.
And so that's what I used to tell people. I used to tell people, I'm not fat. I'm a nuclear storage plant. I'm a storage plant for energy, and I'm just getting ready to unleash on the world.
Yeah, well, there you go. You kind of are, you know, and that's also why, by the way, it takes a long time to lose body fat, because you also chip away at those fat stores, and you have to maintain that energy deficit for quite a long stretch of time to get it off. So all this kind of lose 10 kilos in 10 days stuff is utter nonsense. You can't lose that amount of body fat in that amount of time. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It does sneak up. You also raise an interesting point about, do people necessarily know what it feels good? Because I think about those people who they've actually never been in their optimal health, they really don't know how good it can feel. And so there is my challenge is to how do I actually motivate those people or inspire those people to recognize they could feel a whole lot better than they're currently feeling. And you're right, it's a challenge, but I'm taking it on.
Two big questions. Number one, why is it when I eat 100 grams of chocolate that I put on 2 kilos?
Well, you know what? When you put on those 2 kilos, it might also be that you've stored up some glycogen. So,
there we go.
You know, glycogen is a big, bulky molecule. It's our store of carbohydrates. So plants will store carbohydrate as starch. We store it as glycogen in liver and in muscles. And if you're fit and you look like you work out and you go to the gym, if your muscles are fit and you regularly do exercise, actually you get better. It's storing glycogen, you can store it a bit more. But the reason there's a limit to how much carbohydrate we can store in our body is because it's bulky. You store every molecule of carbohydrate gets stored with a massive amount of water. And that's useful when you're exercising, you break down the glycogen, that fuels your muscles. It also releases some water to help keep you hydrated. So it's a useful system, but it's a big bulky system.
Yeah, right.
That's why we store fat. So we've got a limited amount of carbohydrate. If you and I head outside and we start running, which I don't really want to do, it's a hot day out there.
Apparently it's like 40 degrees out there.
It's really hot out there. So let's not do this. But theoretically, if we went outside, we started running, you know, within a couple of hours, we can hit the wall. The runners call it hit the wall. And that means you've used up all your carb stores. Fat, if we could just be walking and using mostly fat, we can walk for a whole lot longer because fat can keep us going for weeks and weeks.
That opens an interesting question that we kind of touched on before. This concept of fat adaptation, which is becoming very popular with the use of things like intermittent fasting and the different types of diets that produce or ketogenic diet. So is it fair to say that also not just what we eat but when we eat is having a detrimental impact on the health that we're experiencing in our everyday lives?
Well, I just think we're bombarding ourselves with too much food too often.
Yep.
If you look at our ancestors in the past or you look at those blue zones, things like fasting have been used for eons mostly within religions actually, and mostly for health reasons. And now it's being explored and researched for its potential impact on weight control. And at the moment, the research I certainly support it as being an option.
Yep.
Because I think, and that's what the research is showing, is that it's at least as effective as more traditional sort of just reducing your energy intake every day. So I think for some people it definitely is an option. One of my other key areas of interest, or rather it's two, and these areas are linked, is gut health and brain health. So I'm writing a book at the moment on brain and coming up with great recipes that are good for helping us to preserve our brains. But actually the brain is intimately linked to the gut. And the other
cranial
thing,
nerve that's connected
there
to it
is
as well,
the vagus nerve connects the two. Vagus, yeah. So there's communication all the time, particularly from the gut to the brain. So what's going on in your gut is crucially important. So what certainly seems to be the case is that when you go without food and we're only talking short, even if you do what I call the overnight fast, instead of grazing into the evening and then eating the minute you're awake again in the morning, having a proper 12-hour fast overnight without even doing something like intermittent fasting is enough to give your gut a break and actually has benefits for the microbiome, which is the bugs that are living in your gut, actually gives your gut that break. So I think you're right. Part of our problem today is that this constant grazing, constant snacking all day long that hardly gets a break apart from when we're sleeping. And that's a real issue. Because
I don't think a lot of people realise the amount of energy that's required to digest food. And especially if you're eating, food that is not like processed food, little caloric value, little macro value, it requires in most cases more energy to digest the food than you actually get from the food. And the fact that our body needs energy to repair, if it's constant, and our intestines have the largest blood supply of any organ in the body. So if we're constantly putting food into our gut is constantly drawing on the energy and the resources to digest it, and those energy and resources don't actually get the opportunity to go to other parts of the body and clean up.
Yeah, well, you're certainly diverting your body's attention and task to constant digestion instead of being able to then divert blood to muscles to go for a walk, or to your brain to think. Of course, blood is always going to your brain, but it's really useful to be able to take that break from digestion. But the other interesting thing that just came to my mind as I was listening to you talk about processed foods, if you think of the gut as a great big long tube, essentially, it is. One of the issues with eating too much processed food is not that necessarily you're taking more energy. That it's energy dense stuff, and it's incredibly easy to absorb that energy, but it's nutrient poor. It's also all absorbed really high up in the gut.
Yeah.
And then you're not using vast lengths of the gut are not being used as they should. And that is part of the reason why we have so many people with gut problems today, not just serious things like bowel cancer, but irritable bowel and having problems with the gut bugs and all this sort of stuff that goes on now with gut issues and feeling bloated and uncomfortable and so on is because we're not making full use of the gut as we need to be doing. And the gut is that long in order to be able to digest and process and metabolize whole foods. And if you feed your gut whole foods, the knock-on effect on physical and mental health is enormous.
So I think one of the biggest challenges that people have with being healthy is I think being healthy is being boring. I can't drink alcohol. I can't eat donuts. I can't eat my cake. But the reality is we can actually have we can have our cake and eat it too, because let's be honest, what's the point of having cake if you can't eat it?
Of course we can. And this comes back to that element of joy. There is absolutely room for some cake, donut, a glass of wine, a beer, whatever it might be that is your enjoyment and your factor in life, because it comes down to the big picture. I'm very much a big picture person. We argue so much in the media about nutrition, and we argue over the nitty gritty, over is this diet better than this diet, is it this, is it that? When we step back and we look at the big picture, we understand how to feed humans. And if the largest part of your diet is mostly made up of whole foods, then there is that leeway and there is that scope to be able to enjoy whatever else it might be.
Yeah.
And that's really important to remember. And if you get people doing that, then it also makes it more achievable to do long term.
Exactly.
It's not about following some extreme diet or never eating a whole set of foods again. It's actually just about balance.
Because I think, do you think it's fair to say that food has kind of lost its lost its place in society? Because once upon a time we ate because it was what we needed to have the fuel required to go out and get more, harvest more, catch more, or go to work. And now it's become almost a form of entertainment where we consume food, in some cases either based on how it makes us feel, or we consume food based on how we are feeling and what we're drawn to.
That's kind of emotional eating that you're touching on. I often call it swallowing your emotions with food. And that can, all of us eat for, Dr. Rick Hausman, who's the author of If Not Dieting, Then What? And he talks about non-hungry eating is his terminology. And I think that's a really nice term for it. And we all do it to some extent, if you think about it. If it's your birthday and we share a birthday cake, or, we go out for a drink after this interview, that's not us giving our fuel that we need to our body. We're eating or drinking for other reasons. Yep. Now, an element of that is what makes us human, and your dog will also eat if it's not hungry, if you put something tasty in front of it. So will your cat. The cat might be a bit pickier. But, so it's not a uniquely human thing, but it is part of what makes us human, is that we make our food so tasty. And since the advent of cooking, actually we've become experts at being chefs and cooks and making food more and more delicious. Now, I fully support that. I'm a foodie. I love to cook, and I want my food to taste good. But it's also a luxury of modern life that we have this choice in food. And the flip side of being able to make our food so tasty is that sometimes it's really hard to stop eating because it's highly palatable. You give a rat in the lab a highly palatable, what you call a cafeteria diet, the rats tend to overeat. So it is this sort of balance of going, we want our food to be really tasty and enjoy it, but we've got to somehow still help our bodies to be able to control appetite, be able to control how much we eat, and not be, led into this constant state of overeating because food tastes so good.
Okay. So we've talked about the psychology of health. We've talked about the importance of keeping it realistic when we start. So let's say we're starting to get our head in the right place. We're starting to recognize, okay, maybe what I think feeling good isn't feeling good. Maybe there's a better way to feel, or maybe I can remember what it used to feel like to feel good. I'm starting to think differently. I'm starting to get realistic with my goals. Then what? Like, how do we? Because I like the fact that you're talking about one size isn't going to fit all, and that's what you referred to with intermittent fasting. But if someone doesn't know what size they are, i.e., what they should be doing, where do they start?
Well, by making sure that you're getting your information from the right place.
Right.
There is so much information on the internet now that it can make it really confusing. So one of the key questions that I get from people whenever I do a public speaking event is that they say to me, I'm confused now about what a healthy diet is, what a healthy lifestyle is even. So I think that's the first thing, is to just check.
Because paleo came out, was hot, it gets slammed. Intermittent fasting came out, it gets slammed. It's almost like everyone's got a vested interest in slamming having the other. So it creates this high level of confusion.
Yeah, and when you look at the research, though, there isn't that much level of confusion. We are researching and arguing over the details. You know, nutrition science is a reasonably young science. We only discovered vitamins and minerals last century. So when you think about how young it is as a science, there's still much that we don't know, but we do understand the basics. And actually, even if you look at two seemingly diverse dietary approaches, paleo diet compared to vegan, and you think that these are poles apart and they're other opposite ends of the spectrum, actually they've got more in common than they do apart. Because
tell that to a vegan
or a paleo. But what those diets have in common is that they both actually, if you're doing them properly, include lots of plant foods. They don't include junk food. They're whole food diets. It's just that the paleo guys are going to add their grass-fed beef and their their wild salmon or whatever, and the vegans are going to add beans and legumes and tofu to theirs. So it's the commonalities, I think, between dietary approaches that is more interesting to me, and stepping back and looking at the big picture. And then when it comes down to the individual, there's individual choice. So you can say, do I have any allergies and intolerances? What's my cultural background? You know, I come from Scotland, where I've got a mum who just thinks if potatoes aren't part of a meal, it's not a meal. You know, potatoes have just got to be in my world, you know. But I have them in the skin, and I cook them with my beautiful Aussie extra virgin olive oil, and I make the family homemade chips that way. So you know, it's about your culture, your likes and dislikes. You know, if you really hate kale, I can promise you can have a really healthy diet and never touch kale. So those things to me are just as important in your food choices as the nutrition science and, you know, what I might say is a really healthy approach. And I'm all about flexible. You know, I teach people a sort of template for eating, and then you layer over all the things that are really important to you, so that ultimately you end up with a diet that both is healthy, is evidence-backed with the science about what we understand is good for us, but also that you really love and enjoy.
Okay. And so the best way to push someone in the right direction is say, start with what you enjoy that is in the good. Is there a way that you can summarize your template in a simple way? Yeah,
so the template is 1, 2, 3, 4. So picture your plate or your bowl. Half the plate is, well, I call it plant food, but actually 3/4 of the plate is really plant food. So half the plate is veggies and or some fruit. So at breakfast, it might be fruit if you're having a muesli bowl or something like that. The next is about 1/4 of the plate. That's your protein-rich food. So if you eat meat, then it might be meat, it might be fish. If you're a vegetarian or a vegan, it might be your beans or your tofu. It might be dairy foods for people who eat dairy. The next slice on the plate is almost 1/4, but there's a bit chopped out of it. That's your what I call smart carb. So these are the things that fuel the bugs living in your gut. So it's diversity of fiber that's really important. So smart carbs, I'm not a carb basher. It's refined carbs that are the problem. So when we look at things like whole grains and legumes, the potatoes in their skin, you know, those kind of starchy veg are all in that smart carb section. And then the last slice is number 4, and that's your good fats. So avocado, nuts and seeds. Nuts have got just bags of evidence behind them. You can cut your heart disease risk by about 50% simply by having a handful of nuts every day. So nuts, and then our extra virgin olive oil is just a standout fat. Forget the refined rubbish that's on the supermarket shelves. You know, great Aussie food that I've supported for many years. So that's your 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you have that in your mind, and you think when you're filling your supermarket trolley, okay, I need at least half this trolley should be my veggies with some fruit. You know, have I got my whole, you know, think of that same model when you're filling your supermarket trolley.
Yeah, that's smart.
And there's a little bit of space outside of that plate for the extras. If you're trying to get lean, you've got a bit of body fat to lose, or you're on that bit of a health kick, nothing's wrong with doing that. I think of it as riding a horse. I've always got my hands on the reins. Sometimes I've got to pull the reins in a bit.
Yeah.
I'm there right now because I had a big holiday over Christmas in January.
You still look gorgeous.
So, you know, thank you. I'm pulling the reins in a little bit right now, but then I can relax the reins again, and then more of those extras can sneak back in. So I kind of think that if we think on it that way, instead of I'm on a diet, I'm off a diet, I'm doing this, I'm on this, you know, these kind of months of I'm doing this fasting for a month, and then it's all too chop change. You know, you kind of got to be on that horse holding your reins all the time.
Yeah, right. When it comes to having the naughty things, is it also the timing of when we have them? Because one of the things I've noticed, especially from a gut perspective, someone who's done a lot of work on their gut to rebuild it, I've discovered that I can eat naughty things as long as it's not for dessert, which is really interesting. I can, like, if I actually have my dessert before I eat my main meal, my gut is happy. But if I have my dessert after I eat my main meal, I tend to swell up a little bit like a whale. Is this something that is just unique to me, or is this something? Is there some science in this in terms of how these refined carbs mix with certain proteins and other carbohydrates, smart carbs, and create a little bit more gas or inflammation?
Not necessarily. I'm trying to think of, I haven't seen any research that specifically looked at the timing. The only thing I can think of is, we might be an interesting project. I need you in the lab. Look, what might be happening is in terms of total volume of food, sort of all going through at one time. You know, if you imagine what's left over, then sometimes when you eat a whole lot of good stuff and you've had dessert on top, actually the fibers and all the good stuff that's in there can sort of carry some of those sugars right through further into the gut, where potentially the bugs might then be fermenting those, very easy to ferment sugars, and then causing a lot of gas and pain. That's a possible explanation. So all the good stuff is kind of slowing down that digestive process. That's possible. The other thing that I think is interesting is actually, whether you've got good gut function happening, or whether you've got an imbalance going on there in your microbiota, whether you've got a gut that is either lazy or too trigger happy. So we've got some guts that are kind of getting this constant chatter from the brain, and they're sort of overexcitable, and then that's when you often get sort of diarrhea related IBS, and some people will swing between the two, a slow sluggish gut leading to constipation, or a gut that's too trigger happy. And so all of those things that are going on in the background will then affect the way you can deal with whether it's healthy food or whether it's junk food. The other interesting thing that has been shown in research, and this is one of my colleagues, Professor Felice Jacka, who I've been working with recently on the Catalyst Gut Revolution shows that we've been doing. Felice's work is very much in the mental health space, and her work has and others have shown that in fact, diet is directly related to mental health, that you have lower rates of anxiety and depression when you eat really well, particularly a Mediterranean style diet. But what she's also shown, and the link is certainly part of that link, is via the gut microbiome. But what they have also shown, that even if you eat pretty well most of the time, if you have too much junk food, that is still negatively impacting your mental health, because the junk food is still having an impact on your gut microbiota. So, yes, while I support, yes, you can have a little bit of whatever it is, the naughty stuff, let it tip up too much, even if you're still in, good shape and you're still keeping your weight under control, it can still be impacting both your gut function and your mental health.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. So coming back to the timing, if we're going to eat shit, when should we do it?
Well, I would suggest that you just don't eat shit every day, and that you do make sure that you compensate by eating less, so that your kilojoules are reduced overall. Because there's no doubt that, eating shit on top of all of your other meals is just adding a whole load of unnecessary kilojoules. So, I would say have it through the day is better. One of the worst habits that we see is that sort of grazing on rubbish food into the evening. It also impacts, not just on weight control, but it actually impacts on your sleep more than anything else. So I would say have it through the day while you're being more active and you've got the opportunity to perhaps expend a bit more energy and work it off. And just pay attention to portion size. I'm not long back from Japan. One of the things that they do really well in Japan is that, if you look at the cake shops around Tokyo, if you ever get the chance to visit Tokyo, look at the cake shops, and they have tiny little beautifully presented portions of cake. You look in a cake shop here in Sydney and it's massive serves. So portion size of your treat foods or your junk foods, whatever you want to call them, is really important.
Okay. So, I think gut health is something that's often left out of the conversation when we talk about good health and well-being, even weight loss. Because I know for myself, when I started to get my act together and I started to, really focus on getting myself back to where I wanted to get to, I was eating really well. I thought I was eating really well. I was doing a level of exercise. I was hydrating really well. But I still was feeling like crap. And what I didn't realize was my gut, from the 10 years of abuse with food, actually hadn't repaired itself. And I needed to actually look at what I had to do to repair my gut in order to repair my health overall. Because is it fair to say that it doesn't matter how healthy you eat, if your gut's not working properly, it's not going to necessarily give you the greatest advantages that you're looking for?
Oh, for sure. Look, I firmly believe that the gut is right at the center of physical and mental health, actually. Yeah. So, in the work that I've been doing in the last year in relation to the gut documentaries that we've been making, I've had the opportunity to interview experts all around the world who are working in this space. So it's it was a fascinating journey. And it's reinforced, what I've long held beliefs about, that gut really is central to everything. If your gut isn't functioning well, well, your energy is impacted, your ability to have joy in life is impacted if your gut is giving you grief. So absolutely we've got to look at gut health. The only thing that concerns me at the moment, and this comes back to that sort of flurry of information that there is and all sorts of sources of information, is that there's a lot of nonsense out there about how to heal the gut, about what might be wrong in the first place, and about what to do about it, even the kind of diets to follow. So I just add a word of warning about you just got to be careful. There's a lot we don't know yet about how to heal the gut. We're only just starting to be able to really determine and look and visualize, because of new technologies, what's going on inside the gut. Being able to measure effectively the microbiome is itself a challenge. And then being able to look at, and we now do understand that we can have really low-grade inflammation in the gut lining that previously wasn't being able to pick. You currently can't see it in a colonoscopy, the traditional ways of doctors trying to ascertain what might be wrong in someone's gut. So it's only these new technologies that are being able to illustrate that. And so we're just on the cusp of being able to understand, okay, what do we need to do to improve someone's gut if they've got problems? So we're getting there, and there are some really significant steps forward for people with IBS. The low FODMAPs diet, for example, is one, but even that now is being misused and misunderstood. So I urge people that if you've got problems, see your doctor first. You want to rule out anything medical. And if it is ascertained that it's down to gut health and the way that you're eating, your lifestyle, then see a dietitian who's experienced in things like IBS and in gut health and in the use of a low FODMAPs diet, so that they can help you to use it in the way that it's intended to be used. It's not a diet for life. It's a short-term measure to get symptoms under control. And then, as you have done, then you can gradually get to, because we certainly know the type of diet that's important for a healthy microbiome and for a healthy gut.
So when we look at, and again, I think one of the biggest challenges that most people have is self-assessment. Most people don't know they've got a problem with their gut because, I always swell up after a meal. I always get gas after a meal. I've always been constipated. My mum was constipated. I've always had a trigger-happy squirt mechanism, or what they call it, the Hershey squirts. So
I use that term. I'm going to take that.
By all means. So I'm curious for someone, again, to hit the baseline and go, okay, well, maybe what I'm experiencing isn't normal. Just because I've had it my whole life, just because maybe my parents had it, doesn't. What are some of the symptoms of poor gut health?
Yeah, well, I think you've actually touched on something that's really important, and that is what is normal. Because we also see people who actually don't understand that their situation is normal. So when I see people who have got really serious bloating, and we're talking looking like they're pregnant sometimes after eating, I've seen those people at that end of the spectrum. But equally, I've seen people who think that they're bloated when actually it's just normal gut function going on, or they are a bit constipated, and that's what's leading to the bloating, not some food intolerance. So because we're hesitant to talk about bowel health, I'm always perfectly happy to talk about it because I'm so accustomed to it. But if you think about a normal conversation, you don't chat with your friends or even with your partner. You don't tend to chat about how often do you have a bowel motion and what was the bowel motion like and what was the consistency.
Consistency, shape, colour, smell.
How often
did it float?
do you fart, Kerwin,
Yeah.
every day? We don't really have those conversations. So
well, welcome to a very comfortable place because I initially started fasting back in 2000, but I started doing the 7 to 10 day water fast. Now I do those twice a year, and I obviously ended up moving into the intermittent schedule because it became more effective and more consistent. It was less event based, but I got to the point where twice a year I was going over to Thailand and I was just talking for, in some cases, a week to 2 weeks with people about shit and about what was coming out of the body, what was going in the body. And I found one of the things I found really fascinating was this term that a lot of medical scientists don't want to even acknowledge. It's called mucoid plaque. And mucoid plaque, I discovered, was when we combine certain foods or when we eat in certain states in the body to protect itself from the acidic nature of the environment that it creates to be able to digest and process some of these combinations of foods, it will produce mucus around the foods and then pass the food into the digestive tract, into the intestines, and then that mucus can then coat the villi, and then it can actually, over time, it can build up, and then it can actually turn into this rubber-like substance. Now, I thought this was mystical until I actually had it come out of my own body, until I actually saw, feet, and in some cases, multiple feet of this tubing that had come out of people's body. But what I found most interesting, and again, thankfully we've got this all on video. One of the things I found most interesting, I'd be really interested to hear your take on this. I remember I was reading this. It was quite an alternative perspective health book, and it was talking about the emotions that we experience in the moment of eating are actually imprinted on the food, and the quality of that food will determine obviously how it's digested and whether or not it produces this mucus that can then be deposited on the linings of the wall, and then that mucus that is deposited on the lining of the walls will also then contain not only the mucus, but it'll also contain a resonance of the energy that was imprinted on it when it was consumed. And I remember reading this thinking, this is a little bit out there. Fast forward 2 years. I'm in the midst of a 10-day fast. I think I was on like day 4 or day 5. I was having 1 colonic a day, and we used to have 4 psyllium husk shakes, psyllium husk and bentonite shakes a day. And I used to do what I used to call my colonic meditation. So I'd sit there and meditate, and I'd just tune into my gut, and I'd go to where it felt uncomfortable, and I'd massage. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I felt this enormous pain. Like it was like overwhelming. It was like vibrations going through my body. And then my memory went back to an argument that I'd had with a girlfriend when I was about 19 years of age. I remember I was on the side of the road in Brisbane. I was on my second hot dog, and I was drinking a strawberry flavored milk. Now this was a very intense argument. It wasn't physical, but it was incredibly intense, incredibly emotional. Like it was intense. And then all of a sudden that memory disappeared, and something exited my body into the basket that literally looked like an alien from another planet.
Oh, God.
But it was at that point I was like, wow, okay, maybe there's actually something in this. So is it fair to say that we need to be also not only conscious of the foods that we eat and when we eat them, how we eat them, but also the state, the emotion, the level of consciousness that we apply to the moment when we're actually consuming food?
Yeah, well, look, I haven't seen any scientific evidence to talk about things like mucuses are produced naturally by the lining of your gut, and that's part of, and actually mucus also serves as the fuel source for many of the bugs living in your gut. So there's this balance between producing the right amount of mucus and the right amount of it actually being degraded and fermented by the bugs in there. That's all an important part of the process. So, I'm very much a scientist who needs to see that's kind of empirical evidence to see if anything like that exists. As for whether emotions can be wrapped up in there, no. And I've not seen a paper about that. You'd need to do.
I'll send you some photos.
Do I want to see them?
No, you do.
I don't know.
I would change our relationship to a level I'm not comfortable with right now.
Yeah. As for things like colonics and what I hear all sorts of stuff from people who say, "Oh, I had a colonic and all this stuff came out of me." There's I actually sort of feel like you shouldn't be putting stuff up your gut. The gut is designed to go from top down. And if you're eating properly and you're not getting constipated, then actually that system should be working really well and you shouldn't need to be having colonics. So that's the other thing on that. As when it comes to emotions, what we certainly know is that emotions are connected to your gut function. So if you eat in a state where you're really angry or you're really stressed or you're really upset, then there's absolutely no doubt that you're impacting on your gut function because you're in that emotional state. So, the easiest way for anyone to understand how emotions affect your gut is just think about when you're really nervous about something. So I know you do some public speaking as I do. If I'm doing a really big event and I'm a bit nervous about it, what's the thing that happens so often? You run to the loo. And so anytime that you're doing something that you're nervous or just getting butterflies in your stomach, you can feel, even some of the terminology we use, a gut feeling. You get a gut feeling or a gut sense. So the terminology in our language shows us that the gut is intimately connected to our emotions. So that I firmly believe.
And so do we need to be very careful of the emotional state that we're in when we eat? Because that have a direct impact on our ability to... Because, for example, I know when we experience a stress stimulus, body releases cortisol, adrenaline, a number of other biochemical factors are going into play. But one of the things that I've read is it actually... there's certain things that are... I think it's the cortisol that inhibits the ability for the guts to digest certain proteins that enable the brain to function at a high level, and as a result, we can reduce our IQ by as much as 30 to 50%.
Well, I don't know that there certainly isn't evidence that it will lower your IQ, and if we're talking acutely or chronically, stress certainly impacts on your brain function, whether or not it's via the diet. And we certainly know that the diet affects. This is what I'm writing about at the moment: is how your diet and your lifestyle affect your brain power, your performance of your brain. I often talk, my corporate talks. I often speak about how can you be at your most creative, how can you be at your highest energy level, how can you work and make your brain work effectively, but also how do you help your brain to age as well well as it can and reduce your risk of cognitive decline and dementia and so on as you get older. And we've got a lot of evidence there behind how a good, healthy, balanced diet and a good, healthy gut actually impacts your brain long term. So we certainly know about that. What I think will certainly happen is if you eat when you're in a highly stressed state, you're actually in fight or flight reaction. So, in the past, our ancestors had more of acute stress and very little chronic stress, although of course there could be some chronic stress, to do with illness or, finding enough food or whatever, but mostly it'd be acute stress. So it's the, typical scenario of running from danger. So you get this, that's why you get this drive of cortisol, of adrenaline. And what it does is usually it will empty your bowels. So it's often why you go to the toilet when you're really stressed. You want to empty your bowels to make your body lighter to then be able to run. So the blood is diverted to muscles, to your brain, in order to be able to deal either fight or flight. And of course, the body at that point, the priority is not to be digesting food. So if you're eating in a very stressed state, then yes, your ability to digest and metabolize that food is reduced, and therefore you're going to get indigestion. You're going to feel discomfort. There's going to be more fermentation going on there, gas production and so on, and you've likely, impacted on your digestion. What we certainly is not going to happen though is it doesn't mean that suddenly you don't get the same kilojoules, unfortunately, out of your food. We're very good at extracting kilojoules from food, particularly if you're eating a lot of processed food. You've taken away the body's work. Instead of eating a plant in its whole form, something like a whole grain, and you've refined it down and you've just pulled out the sort of starchy center of the grain and you've refined it and mixed it with sugar and made it into your donut. You've made it very easy for the body to get that energy without breaking down any fibers, without breaking down plant cell walls and so on. So we get instant energy, but we get low nutrients. So that's something that nutrition science is deeply looking at, is the difference between energy density of foods, how many kilojoules in every bite, versus nutrient density, how many nutrients are you really getting? And that's what we see in typical kind of Western style diets where we've got very energy dense food. We've got no trouble getting our kilojoules, but people are malnourished because they're eating poor nutrient dense foods.
Which is what we're seeing obese people who are experiencing malnutrition. Yeah. Which is kind of ironic when you think about it.
Exactly. And we see things like, I was talking with one of the meetings I was in this week. There was a GP in that meeting talking about the number of kids she's seeing these days with constipation coming in with abdominal pain. And the parents don't believe when she says, actually, your kid is constipated. And the second thing is iron deficiency. So, when I first studied as a dietitian over 20 years ago now, we were told, you'll hardly ever see true overt nutrient deficiencies. You'll possibly see a bit of iron deficiency. Now we're seeing, vitamin D deficiency, folate deficiency. We see, and iron deficiency is the most common deficiency worldwide, for all sorts of different reasons. So, we really are seeing malnourished humans now, which, in a country like Australia shouldn't be happening.
And I think what I'm also seeing, and it's an epidemic that I think has been going in the US for a while, but I'm seeing it creep into Australia. There's antacid medications that seem to be taking up more and more shelf space. These antacid delivery systems, gone from a tablet to chewable tablets to lozenges to drinks. Yeah. So reflux seems to be an issue that is not just for babies anymore. What is reflux? Yeah. What can we do to deal with it from a diet perspective? And if we perhaps are dealing with it, are there some quick fixes that we can use that are a little bit healthier than grabbing a pill off a pack?
Yeah, great question. Reflux is a sign that the upper part of your gastrointestinal tract is not working effectively. At the bottom of the esophagus is the tube that carries food down from the mouth to the top of the stomach. And there's a circular muscle there, a sphincter muscle, that is supposed to keep the stomach contents are very acid. That's in order to kill any bugs that have come in with your food and to help the digestive process starting. So carbohydrate digestion actually starts here. It starts in the mouth actually, but it's digestion starts to take place in the stomach. And it's designed to stop the movement of the stuff in the stomach coming back up into the esophagus. The stomach lining has a lot of mucus there. It's got a very special lining so that the stomach lining can't be damaged by the acid, but the esophagus doesn't. So heartburn is when you've got stuff coming back through this little circular muscle and it's effectively burning the sides of the esophagus. Now it sounds like, I just, down some Gaviscon, that's all I need to do. You're just treating the symptoms. You're not treating the cause. You're not treating what is wrong. Why is this little muscle allowing stomach contents to come back up? So we've got to look at why that's happening. And lots of things can be helpful. Making sure you sit up. after you finish eating. Don't go and lounge on the sofa or go and lie down. Eating too close to bed, you're almost likely certain to get heartburn if you're continually lying down immediately after, or even, within a couple of hours of eating when you've still got stomach contents there. Eating too much, so eating a really big meal, you're then putting pressure. Being overweight, being pregnant, of course, both of those things are putting pressure on the stomach, pushing stomach contents up. Some people have various things that make the muscles relax a bit more, and so that once that muscle is damaged, that's when you really might need some medical help there to sort of help repair. But you need to help the muscle and the esophagus to repair. So eating small meals more often, things like ginger can be really, really helpful. And I would be advising to really avoid, if you're having to take antacids regularly, you need to see your doctor or see a dietitian. Try a dietary lifestyle approach first, because actually what you're doing is you're creating problems further down the line. If you're continually taking antacids, you're potentially you're not allowing the body to do its job. The stomach's acid for a reason, but you're potentially also making your body then either produce more acid in an attempt to do it, which makes it then more difficult for you to get off the antacids. But there's all sorts of gut problems that can happen down the line if you're continually taking those medications.
Yeah, right. And I used to experience, most of my life I experienced reflux. And what's interesting is as soon as I went into the intermittent fasting protocols, completely gone.
It's gone away.
Yeah, totally gone away completely. Which is interesting.
Well, some people also find there's trigger foods, if they do have too much junk food or they have too much.
And I was one of those people. It was certain trigger foods that would happen, so I couldn't eat, if I ate pasta and a protein with the pasta, I'd get reflux every single time. Yeah. Whereas now, like last night I went out and I don't do this very often anymore, but I had like a meat pizza and a meat pasta. And I had I had pretty much a whole pizza and pretty much a big piece of pasta. And I know, going back 2.5 years ago, I'd eat that meal and I'd be suffering for hours. Last time I ate that meal, and not only did I not swell up, but there was no reflux, and I got on with the rest of my evening without any dramas whatsoever.
Yeah, so your stomach is working effectively. It may well be, because the trouble is if you get reflux regularly, you're actually, the muscle itself is inflamed and you're much more likely to get more reflux. Yeah, right. So it might well be that your gut is now functioning as it should, and that little sphincter is doing its job, and so it was able to keep that food down, and your stomach is in a healthier situation. I think the other important thing to say is if you've got stomach problems, and you get stomach pain, then see your doctor, because that can also be an infection that's in the stomach. So there's a little bug. We used to think that stomach ulcers were caused by stress, and now we understand that actually something like 95, it might even be higher than that, % of stomach ulcers are caused by Helicobacter, which is a little bug, and so now it can be treated with antibiotics. I'm against using antibiotics unless they're absolutely necessary, but that's one time when you need an antibiotic to knock that bug out, and then suddenly your stomach can repair and your stomach then functions normally.
Fantastic. This has been a very enlightening conversation. And the beauty about these conversations, I never plan where they're going to go. I just let them unfold. And the fact that we've talked about gut, we've talked about poo, we've talked about diet. The only thing we haven't talked about, though, is exercise and mobility. We touched on it as a part of the process. But when it comes to exercise and mobility, because I think some people look at exercise as something that's hard. I don't want to sweat. Well, after all, sweat is fat crying. But when we look at exercise, you said, I like to distinguish exercise and activity as two different things. So, we've talked about the psychology of good health. We've talked about the mechanics of good health from a diet perspective, the importance of a healthy gut in order to be healthy. But we haven't talked about the mobility. We haven't talked about the exercise. Yeah. And again, most people go, well, I walk to the train every morning. That's their baseline. Yeah. What is the baseline level of exercise and or activity that we should be doing if we want to be healthy?
Well, the first thing is that there's a nice link there from gut to being active, because in fact, a lot of people with gut problems, those problems are really stemming from the amount of time we spend sitting down. So sitting down is not good for the gut. So I always say, you will rarely find a constipated runner, because immediately that you move, even if it's brisk walking, try, if people who are constipated, I say go for a brisk walk and see what happens. Because as soon as you move and you're energized and your muscles are working, actually it stimulates the gut to contract too. So those are intimately linked. The second question about how much do we need to do? Well, I talked earlier about the blue zones. When we look at the blue zones, those people are just more active every day. So the Japanese are a good example. One of the blue zones is Okinawa. That's one of the prefectures of Japan. In Okinawa, they dance and do Tai Chi and they garden. They're big gardeners. And they do that right late into life. You know, when we look at some of the Greek cultures or whatever, again, there's gardening, there's this sort of more traditional lifestyles, the Seventh-day Adventists in California. Again, they have these more active lifestyles. So I tend to encourage people to think about activity first and foremost. Limiting or breaking up your sitting time. Stand, if it's possible to stand rather than sit, do so. You know, invest in a standing desk, or, you know, I work from home, so I have a seated desk, but I can hop up and hang up a load of washing, or, you know, go and water the plants, or take a break and go and walk my dog. You know, just building those little bursts of activity into your day are incredibly important. And then, if you can, layer over the top some actual exercise. So if you can start with a baseline of a half-hour walk every day is a really great start. So that walking to the train station or walking from the other end to your work is great. If you can build that up to make sure that you at least do half an hour over the course of the day, that's a baseline. And then try and build up from there. You know, Fitbits and Jawbones and all those sorts of things. Activity trackers are great, because then you can start going, okay, I've got to hit that magical 10,000 steps.
Yeah, it makes it fun to pursue
I've had a lot of guys like that, because
Yeah.
men tend to like numbers and have a figure on there that you've got to aim for.
It's something to compete with.
Yeah, and compete with your mates, or, you know, my family are spread around the world, and we had a little family competition, and you could see everyone's steps on there, and it got quite competitive. And I've got to say, my mum is the clear winner.
Go, Mum.
She nails the rest of us. She's regularly doing 15,000 steps every day. So go, Mum. She's in her 70s now. So so those kind of things can be really helpful. Then, if you can, the sort of icing on the cake is then to start thinking more about formal exercise. And if you can do, you know, weight training 2 or 3 times a week, the last people, I've said this for a long time, the last people that should be in the gym doing weight training are the big buff young guys. It should be everyone over the age of 35 and women in particular. You know, that's how we started before we were discussing on air here, where we were talking about anti-aging. One of the best things you can do to control your weight, but also to age well, is to maintain your muscle mass, or even build some muscle mass later in life. So if you can get some sort of resistance training happening, it doesn't have to be in the gym with weights. It can just be doing some push-ups and
calisthenics is
power
making a
yoga.
comeback. I'm telling you right now, it's going to make a huge comeback.
Anything that involves using your muscle, you know, if you don't use muscle, you're gradually going to lose it over the years. And that's incredibly important. So think of it in those layers. What's the baseline? When I'm ticking that box, then move up the layers until you can, you know, be adding some exercise regularly into your week.
And I like the moderation component. And also, I think we need to kind of break a few myths about how much exercise needs to be done. And look, you might have a different perspective on this, but I was a competitive athlete, competitive bodybuilder, competitive powerlifter, you know, up until the age of around 22. And then from 22 until like my probably late 20s, early 30s, I still trained. But my idea of training was 6 days a week, alternating muscle groups, hour in the morning, hour in the evening, just for weight resistance, and then, you know, cardio on the rest day. What's interesting now, as I've gotten older, and I ended up with a very broken body, you know, lots of injuries. And then last year was the year of the body, where I literally went around my entire body, bit by bit by bit, got the surgeries I needed to do. And what's interesting also about the intermittent fasting, I've had injuries that I've had for 10, 15 years that have spontaneously healed just without any exercise, without any rehabilitation, just by the restriction of calories over time.
Yeah.
But to get to my point, since I've started exercising again only a few months ago, I'm exercising for maybe, if I'm lucky, 20 to 30 minutes, maybe 3 times a week, all calisthenics, all body resistance. And my body is now in better shape than it was in my mid-20s, when I was punishing it on a regular basis, which kind of leads to this interesting quote that was given to me by Jack Zublik, a client of mine. He says, Kerwin, he says, you're trying to punish the body you hate versus create the body that you love. Yeah. And that for me was a huge shift in the psychology of, because, you know, I used to go to the gym and go, I'm going to punish myself, because that was my psychology. My psychology was, if I want to be fit and healthy, then I have to experience high levels of pain. Now, I think there's a little bit of truth in that from a weight resistance perspective, but I was going way too far. So is it fair to say that there's been a significant paradigm shift in the amount of exercise that we think we need to do in order to be fit and healthy?
Yeah, well, I think part of that also comes down to a mindset. And the other thing that was occurring to me that I have learned as well is that you have to change the type of exercise you're doing as you get older. You know, your body's needs are different. And I see so many people now, you know, I'm in my 40s now, and the exercise I'm doing now compared to, I love being in my 40s. It's a great 20s. Decade. Yeah. The exercise I'm doing now is very different to when I was teaching. You know, at one point I was teaching 20 fitness classes every week and slamming my body that way. So I couldn't agree with you more that we definitely have to change the way that we are. But part of it is also that mindset of, you know, probably because you were an athlete and you were used to those very high levels of training. At that time, if I had suggested to you, you know what, you could do 20 minutes, half an hour and have a really great workout, you wouldn't have believed me because you'd come from this space. Whereas other people are not exercising at all, it's, you know, for them to think, oh, I've got to do an hour in the morning, an hour at night, that's ridiculous. So, you know, I think you've got to change what you're doing over time, and you've got to recognize that, yes, if you overtrain, that can be just as damaging. You know, I've got lots of colleagues of mine in the fitness industry are now getting knee replacements and hip replacements, and because they've just slammed their bodies too hard. So it's, you know, exercise is that balance. Exercise science has moved on too. You know, we are understanding, you know, look at the way that gyms have changed. I've just moved down to Maroubra, and it's a brilliant fitness first near us, great gym. And what I'm loving is they've got all these different areas, and functional fitness has become a huge thing. So there's a whole area of the gym that's dedicated to using body weight, using resistance, you know, and with the help of things like TRXs or pushing a sledge or working with you know, all sorts of different kinds of tools to work out in a very different way to that sort of traditional, I'm going to go and lift weights in the gym. So that's still there too, but it's finding what's going to work for your body, and that's where, you know, engaging the help of an exercise physiologist or a really good personal trainer can be very, very helpful, or just going along to a really great class. But, you know, we've also had the rise and there's exercise out there for everyone. You know, I've always been a fan of group exercise because I think it's a good way to motivate, and it's affordable compared to things like personal training for everyone to get involved with. But now, you know, I look at the way the classes have changed. You know, those old style classes are very dancey, kind of girly. You know, I started in the Jane Fonda era of thong leotards and leg warmers.
We're probably around the same age. You know, Reebok step.
You know, all that stuff. Very fancy choreographed classes that I used to teach at City Gym. To now, there's lots more men. City Gym.
Oh my God.
Do you remember those days?
Of course I do. That was my first membership.
Well, there you go. I used to teach some of those fancy classes up there. And now we see a whole load more men in classes because we've got really athletic classes, great things like power yoga and all sorts of different styles of yoga, from more meditative to more power. We've got Pilates classes, there's mind body and body balance and all sorts of different circuit style training classes. So, you know, there really is something for everyone. So, you know, exercise is more accessible than ever before.
And so is information. And I think we live in an age where, and I don't mean to come across harsh, but maybe this is a kick up the arse that some people need. There really is no excuse to be unhealthy unless you've got some kind of a chronic illness. And even if you do have a chronic illness, then you have more of an incentive to be healthy than ever before. Dr. Jo, you have been an absolute pleasure to talk to. I think we're going to have to get you back in here for another conversation.
Thank you.
For those people who want to find out more about you, do we have a book? Do we have a website? How can they do?
I have both, yeah.
Right.
So the website is drjoanna.com.au, spelled Dr Joanna. So come to the website, you can find out about my Get Lean program, you can find out about me, you can contact me if you're interested in me speaking at an event. And my latest book, I've done 6 books so far, I'm writing another one at the moment, but the latest one is Get Lean, Stay Lean, which is really actually a lot of the things we've talked about, those 6 steps and the underpinning of joy is the foundation of Get Lean, Stay Lean. And it's a lifestyle program. It's not a diet.
And I think that's really important for everyone to take home is what we're talking about here is a lifestyle.
Yeah.
You know, and success is a lifestyle, whether it's as a performance athlete, whether it's a business owner, or someone who just wants to experience greater levels of, you know, health and vibrancy. It's really got to become a lifestyle.
Absolutely. And it's got to be joyful.
Yeah. Dr. Jo.
Make it fun.
And what I will say is if you follow her diet, and you clearly don't look like you're in your 40s, so whatever you're doing is working incredibly well. So check out her book, check out her website. But ladies and gentlemen, big thanks for Dr. Jo.
Thanks, Kerwin.
Thank you for coming.
There you have it, guys. Thanks for tuning in to Unstoppable with me, your host, Kerwin Ray. And do me a favor, don't forget to drop me a review on iTunes. Would love to hear what you think. I love reading what you guys have to say. And your reviews make sure we keep creating killer content just like this. If you want to stay up to date with me and all my movements, please jump onto the website, kerwinray.com. And also check us out on social media at Kerwin Ray.